The man immortalized in history as Shaka Zulu was born in 1787 in Melmoth, KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Sigidi Senzangakona, commonly known as Shaka, was a great Zulu king and conqueror. He lived in an area of Southeast Africa between the Drakensberg and the Indian Ocean, a region populated by many independent Nguni chiefdoms. During his brief reign, more than 100 chiefdoms were brought together in a Zulu kingdom that survived not only the death of its founder, but later military defeat and calculated attempts to break it up. Shaka was a son of Senzangakona, ruler of an insignificant small chiefdom, the Zulu. His mother was Nandi, the daughter of a Langeni chief. Information about Shaka's early years is gleaned entirely from oral sources. It is claimed that Shaka was born into Senzangakona's household, but that the couple were not yet married according to traditional custom. A more credible account is that the relationship between Nandi and Senzangakona was illicit, and that Shaka was born in Langeni territory at the Nguga homestead of Nandi's uncle. Shaka's name is said to stem from Senzangakona's claim that Nandi was not pregnant, but was suffering from an intestinal condition caused by the Ishaka beetle. Despite his attempts to deny paternity, Senzangakona eventually installed Nandi as his third wife. Shaka thus spent his earliest years at his father's isiXheBeni homestead near present Babanango, in the hallowed locality known as the Emakosini, or burial place of the kings, where Senzangakona's forebears, the descendants of Zulu, had been chiefs for generations. The relationship between Senzangakona and Nandi seems to have been unhappy and ended with the chieftain driving Nandi from his court. Nandi and her son sought sanctuary in the Mthethwa Valley of the Langeni people. Here, growing up as a fatherless child, Shaka seems to have been the victim of humiliation and cruel treatment by the Langeni boys. At that time there were two strong rival Nguni groups, the Mthethwa, led by the paramount chief 𝙎ᴜᴜ, and the Ndwandwe under the ferocious Zwaid. Later, probably at the time of the Great Famine, known as the Madlantul, Shaka was taken to the Mthethwa people, where shelter was found in the home of Nandi's aunt. He thus grew up in the court of 𝙎ᴜᴜ, who welcomed them with friendliness. Shaka, however, suffered much from the bullying and teasing of the Mthethwa boys too, who resented his claims to chiefly descent. As he grew to manhood, Shaka began to discover new talents and faculties. Outwardly, he was tall and powerfully built, and his skill and daring gave him a natural mastery over the youths in his age group. Inwardly, he was developing a thirst for power. Probably when he was about 23 years old, he was drafted into one of the Mthethwa regiments, where he found a satisfaction he had never known before. With the Impi in the ʻIziqwe regiment, he had the companionship he had previously lacked, while the battlefield provided a stadium in which he could demonstrate his talents and courage. His outstanding deeds of courage attracted the attention of his overlord, and rising rapidly in 𝙎ᴜᴜ's army, he became one of his foremost commanders. At this time, Shaka was given the name Nodumehlezi. While in the Mthethwa army, Shaka became engrossed in problems of strategy and battle tactics, and 𝙎ᴜᴜ contributed much toward Shaka's later accomplishments in war. Militarism was thereafter to be a way of life for him, and one that he was to inflict on thousands of others. On the death of Shaka's father in 1816, 𝙎ᴜᴜ lent his young protégé the military support necessary to oust and assassinate his senior brother Sigujana and make himself chieftain of the Zulu, although he remained a vassal of 𝙎ᴜᴜ. But as 𝙎ᴜᴜ's favorite, he seems to have been granted an unusual amount of freedom to carve out a bigger principality for himself by conquering and assimilating his neighbors, including the Buthelezi clan and the Langeni of his boyhood days. 𝙎ᴜᴜ's death in 1818 was the result of Shaka's treachery, though firm testimony of this is lacking. However, it is known that when 𝙎ᴜᴜ fought his last battle, Shaka did not arrive at the scene until after his overlord's capture. He thus retained his forces intact. Zwaid later murdered 𝙎ᴜᴜ, and, when the leaderless Mthethwa state collapsed, Shaka immediately assumed leadership and began conquering surrounding chiefdoms himself, adding their forces to his own and building up a new kingdom. Zwaid decided to smash his new rival. After a first expedition had been defeated by the superior control and strategies of the Zulu at 𝙎𝙬 Hill, 𝙬ᴜ, in April 1818, sent all his army into Zululand. This time, Shaka wore out the invaders by pretending he was retreating and drawing 𝙬ᴜ's forces deep into his territory. Then, when he had successfully exhausted the invaders, he flung his own regiments on them and defeated them conclusively at the Mthethwa River. This defeat shattered the 𝙬ᴜ state. Part of the main 𝙬ᴜ force under Soshanghane, together with the Jere under Zwangendaba, the Maseko under Ngwane, and the Msene led by 𝙬𝑜ᴜ, fled northwards. The survivors of the main 𝙬ᴜ force settled for a time on the upper Pongola River. In 1826, under 𝙬ᴜ's successor, Sekhunyane, they again fought the Zulu but were routed. The majority then submitted to Shaka. He was able to recruit additional warriors from these sources and proceeded to train them in his methods of close combat. By then, Shaka had no major rival in the area of present-day KwaZulu-Natal. During his brief reign, which lasted only 10 years after his final defeat of the 𝙬ᴜ, his regiments continuously went on campaign, steadily extending their assaults further afield, as the areas near at hand were stripped of their cattle. If a chiefdom resisted, it was conquered and either destroyed or, like the Thembu and Chunu, driven off as landless refugees. When chiefdom was submitted, he left local administration in the hands of the reigning chief or another member of the traditional ruling family appointed by himself. Once in power, Shaka began reorganizing the forces of his people, following ideas he had developed as a warrior in Dingiswayo's army. The assegai. He had seen that the traditional type of spear, a long-handled assegai thrown from a distance, was no good for the regulated fighting in close formation he had in mind. A group of warriors who held onto their assegais instead of hurling them and who moved right up to the enemy behind the shelter of a barrier of shields would have its opponents at its mercy and would be able to accomplish complete victory. Having proved the advantages of the new tactics, Shaka armed his warriors with short-handled stabbing spears and trained them to move up to their opponents in close formation with their body-length cowhide shields, forming an almost impenetrable barrier to anything thrown at them. The formation most generally used was crescent-shaped. Several regiments extending several ranks deep formed a dense body known as the chest, while on each side a regiment moved forward forming the horns. As the horns curved inward around the enemy, the main body would advance, killing all those who could not break through the encompassing lines.